Hey, read through the word. Today is January 6th, and today's lesson is called The City Gates. So, here we are in Genesis chapter 19, verse 1 is what I want us to look at. And it says this: That evening, the two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom. Lot was sitting there, and when he saw them, he stood up to meet them. Okay, so that's our verse. So let's talk some about Lot. So, this is very interesting. So we know that Lot is Abram's nephew, and Lot had left. So let's talk about what happens with Abraham. Now, at this point, so if you're new here, you're going to get used to me drawing an imaginary map this here, and you're going to start to see it because I talk about it so much. And I'm trying to think. Oh, here it is. So as I talk about maps, everybody's always asking about what map book. Hold on, bending over. I recommended a map book here one time and did not realize it was not in print anymore. And so, y'all bought all the used copies on Amazon, so now we can't find it anymore. So, this is a great book. Actually, Wendy gave me this, and I like it. It's called The Rose Chronological Guide of the Bible. This is a good one. Any of the Rose Publishing, anything they do is excellent. So, their map books, those are really great. So, Rose Publishing is good. So, or if you've got a study Bible, there's usually the map of Abram and his journey. So Abram is called, so when we looked back in, when we read Genesis chapter 12, Abram is called out of Ur of the Chaldeans, Mesopotamia, Sumerian culture. He is called up out of there, and actually he and his family are a semi-nomadic tribe. They come out of Ur, and they travel to the, that would be to the northeast to an area called Haran, which will be called Aram, as we move along in the book of Genesis. And then they are there for a while in which would be called either the King's Highway that goes from between the Tigris and Euphrates River, what we know as Babylon, which would be Mesopotamia at that time. And they go over, which is the Fertile Crescent, goes up to Haran, and goes back down by the Mediterranean and goes down into Egypt, which will be later, which he will settle into Canaan. So he goes to Haran. So at that point, Lot and Abram and Sarai are with Abram's dad, whose name is Terah. Now, Terah dies while they're in Haran. God calls Abram to go to Canaan. They go to Canaan, and Lot goes with him. So Lot is his nephew, and we see that Lot had been part of Abram's household from the time they came there, and then there was a conflict that arose. So if you look in chapter 13, in Genesis chapter 13, you see there's a conflict between Lot's, so they're a semi-nomadic tribe that travels in their tents, and they're shepherds. And so they have flocks. That's your wealth of the day. So Lot's flocks are mingling with Abram's flocks, and their shepherds are starting fights with each other. And so they said, something has to happen here. So Abram says, okay. I say Lot showed he had issues then. So in Genesis chapter 13, verse 10, Abram says, here's our land. You pick which one you want. And so Lot looks, and we see so much about Lot right here. Lot's it says that Lot chose I like the way the text says it. Let me grab it. This was back a couple of days ago. In 13:10, it said, Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. The whole area was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, which we would call the Garden of Eden, or the beautiful land of Egypt. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the east of them. He went there with his flocks and his servants, and he parted company with his uncle, Abram. So, Abram settled in the land of Canaan. Here you go. And Lot moved his tents in a place near Sodom and settled among the cities of the plain. But the people of this area were extremely wicked and constantly sinning against the Lord. So that's where you see Abram and Lot. And then it doesn't say the next thing in chapter 14 talked about Lot is basically kidnapped in the middle of a war. And at that point, it says Lot later got in trouble and Abram rescued him. But at that point, he was living in Sodom. So by the time you get to chapter, just a few verses later, 14, chapter 12, it says this. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom. So remember, first he pitched his tents towards Sodom. Now he's in Sodom. He's living inside of Sodom. And they carried off everything he owned. So there we see him. So then by the time we get to chapter 19, which is our today reading, it says Lot is sitting at the entrance of the city. It means he's sitting in the city gates. I believe ESV says it sitting in the city gates, but the NLT says in the entrance of the city. So now, what does this mean? So this is one of those things that I love to look at in the Bible, because you see a meaning behind all of this. So Lot is now a leader in the city of Sodom. He's sitting at the city gates. So what does that mean, Lisa? Okay, sitting at the city gates. This is the first mention in the Bible about a city gate. It is not the last. So, Deuteronomy chapter 21, I've got all of these in your notes. 18 through 21 is in the law of Moses, and it talks about coming to the city gates to settle disputes. In Ruth, now most of you who have read the book of Ruth, the city gates reminds you the whole here's my sandal thing in the book of Ruth, which is Ruth chapter 4 verses 1 through 11, and Boaz. They're trying to settle some the whole kinsman redeemer idea is happening at the city gates. In 1 Samuel chapter 4 verse 18, you have Eli sitting at the city gates of Shiloh. In 2 Samuel chapter 18 verses 1 through 5, and again in chapter 19, you have King David. King David with Absalom, and then when King David's ready to return, he announces that at the city gates. So the city gates is the place in the what we would know as like the town square now was the city gates. In Esther chapter 2, the plot to murder the king that is overheard by Mordecai happens in Esther chapter 2 at the city gates. And so this is what interesting. So the city gates is a place of gathering, of leading men in the city, discussing issues of the day, engaging in commerce, or in planning. Now, so planning and hatching plots, and so we've seen that. We've seen commerce. We've seen these are the leaders, the movers and shakers of the city. So, okay, that's interesting about Lot, and we'll talk about that again more. But it really makes sense when you get to Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, when it talks about that the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church of Christ. And it says that because what that means is no matter what kind, so at the gates of hell, no matter what kind of planning and plotting that Satan does, there's nothing he can do against the plan of God. So it's very interesting that that's what that verse means too. All of these city gates throughout the scriptures connect in the idea that they're trying to teach. So, what does this tell us about our guy Lot? It's a very interesting thing. So I think so many times when we read this account of Sodom and Gomorrah, we're like, oh, poor Lot. Lot did not just wake up. Now, one of the things we need to remember when we're reading scripture as well is time flies like that. When you get in the book of Deuteronomy, you're going to flip a page and you go forward 40 years. So many times, and I think you just discovered that reading the account of the flood of Noah and the ark of, if you've paid attention, I think that was a major discussion in the Facebook group about, you just think 40 days and 40 nights. Well, that was just the rain. Noah was on the ark for a year. And so, but we don't realize that in our reading, because we're reading at really quick pace too. But so this was not a oops, Lot woke up in Sodom and Gomorrah and he was shocked by it. Lot chose the land, and it says when he chose it, he knew. He knew it was Sin City he was pitching his tents outside of. He knew it was Sin City when he was living inside of it. He knew it was Sin City when he was sitting at the gates as a mover and shaker in the city. It was not an oops. It was a step-by-step movement of Lot to align himself with the world versus aligning himself with God. It was a step-by-step movement of his. And we see that. There's not an oops. We're going to watch that many times in Scripture because this is what we do when we read. We're trying to somehow make these people the hero of the story. They're not the hero. The hero of this story is God. God shows mercy upon people who deserve no mercy. God shows his loving kindness towards people who do not deserve it. I mean, that's the story of all the Scripture. God's grace and mercy towards people who are undeserving. Lot's not the hero. So I think so many times we're trying to make it a oops, he sort of did that. But it's much like, off the top of my head, the sin of Eve. When you trace the sin of Eve in the garden, and how she looked and saw and took, and I mean, if you trace, English teacher showing up, if you trace the verbs there, that's what we're doing with Lot. We're tracing the verbs with his movement and where he is. Actually, we're tracing the prepositions with Lot and his involvement in the city. First, he was outside the city, then he was inside the city, and then he was in charge of the city. So it really is looking at that and seeing what we see. So you see this, it's a slow fade. You see it with Eve, King David and Bathsheba. And, all of these people aren't the hero. God's the hero. So stop taking up for them. They're sinners, but God does miraculous things in their life to show himself mighty and powerful and sovereign in all things, just like he works today. Just like he works today. If he didn't work in the life of a sinner, who would he use? Who would he use? So as we look at this, at the life of Lot, at what he's doing, and where it ends up, where am I pitching my tent? Where are my prepositions? What am I doing? Where's my slow fade? Where is my movement? Closer? How close can I get to sin and still justify it? And that's exactly what Lot's doing. And as we read, his being in the city of sin has greatly affected his daughters. So, that's what we're talking about today. The city gates. So, we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.